he's considered evil because he rebuilds the high places, which are areas for them to make new gods. And I'm not saying this like making God seem ridiculous. I'm saying this because I want you to understand how very evil it is if you say you love and you follow the God that created the universe, right? The God of the Israelites, the God Jesus, right? If you say that you follow this God, how evil it is to turn away and to turn to anything else, right? Like that's why I'm noting that. Hey, welcome to Bible 365. This is Kathy Carter, and I am bringing you Bible reading in 1 year using the 1 year chronological Bible reading plan from oneyearbibleonline.com. If you've never been with me before, guys, we are reading through the Bible in 1 year, and I'm just sharing my thoughts, right? Sharing my thoughts, sharing my testimony. Today is day 211, and that makes it July 29th. Our reading today is 2 Kings 21 through 22, 2, 2 Chronicles 33 through 34, 7, and Jeremiah 1 through 2:22. It's not actually that big of a reading, but there is a lot of information in here. And so we're going back to some more historical information, which is something I love because it's concrete and it makes sense. It kind of goes with history. So we are in the nation of Israel. I don't want to go too far back. If you have never been with me before, I would love if you would listen today for however long you want to listen to. And then if it is a blessing to you or it feels like it's helping you make sense and understand the Bible more and God more, then I would love if you would go all the way back to Genesis 1. So go back to the beginning and start your reading plan with that, with Genesis day 1. Because there's a lot happening. This is, and I'm going to go into the dates, but this is 2,000 years after the time of essentially Abraham, right? And maybe even a little bit more, actually probably more. And so we are in the nation of Israel, which has been broken into two kingdoms, Israel and Judah. Israel has been taken away by the land of Assyria. And right now King Hezekiah has just died. So King Hezekiah was a king after God's own heart. Most of the kings were not. So most of the kings of Israel, believe it or not, were actually not following God. They did not love the Lord. They worshiped so many other gods. And so God just really is very, very patient until he says it's time now to punish them in order to bring them back to me. And that's what we had seen a lot of. We went through a ton of prophecies of Isaiah, and so we had seen a lot of that where he was like, this is what's going to happen. You're going to be destroyed, but then you're going to come back. There was no destruction at that time. Again, it was King Hezekiah, and that was in like the 700s. We didn't see any destruction. And then after King Hezekiah died, I'm having a really big enunciation issue today. After King Hezekiah died, now we are with his son Manasseh. Manasseh was a bad king. Okay, so here we go. We're starting in 2 Kings 21. Manasseh was 12 when he became king. That's got to be tough. Like taking everything out of context, whatever, like becoming a king at the age of 12. Why were there no other brothers to take this on, right? Like, was this the only son that he had? He wasn't young. He was definitely in his 40s, at least when he died, because he reigned for upwards. I think he reigned for like, I don't know, 45 years. I can't remember offhand. I should have looked it up. But he reigned for a decent amount of time. So, because he even got an extra 15 years. So it's funny to me that he's 12, which means he had him after he was given that extra 15 years. Maybe that's why this is the king. I don't know. But he was 12 years old. So he's a kid. Like I got a 15-year-old. There's no chance I'm putting him in charge of a kingdom. Like I can barely put him in charge of a bike, like let alone an entire kingdom. So, so this is when he becomes king. So he's probably got to really depend on other people. But what we see, he reigned for 55 years. So this is a long-standing king. So he starts at 12, reigns for 55 years. And then his mother was Hephzibah, which I think is interesting because that means my delight. And that was something we had seen in one of Isaiah's prophecies, that Israel was going to get a new name after they came back from whatever punishment that they were going to have. And they were no longer going to be called desolate and barren, but they were going to be called Hephzibah, which is my delight. Anyway, but he did evil in the sight of the Lord. So in verse 2, he follows all these detestable practices. He does evil in the sight of the Lord. I want to point out a couple of things that they say does evil. And I'm sure I've mentioned this on many occasions, but I think this is really important because I think we have in our minds what evil looks like, right? And I'm going to shoot some things out there to you, and I'm going to say murderers are evil, right? Rapists are evil. Power hungry people are evil. Child endangerment people are evil, right? Like those are the people, right, that we can clearly look at and we can go, that is evil. Did Manasseh do that? Like, was that Manasseh? We don't necessarily know. Here's what we do know. Manasseh rebuilt the high places. So what he did was he let other people, well, he encouraged the kingdom of Israel to serve more gods than just the Lord our God. Now we can come up with a whole different a set of ideas of what that looked like. Like maybe these other gods were doing evil things, right? Maybe they worshipped murder. Like I don't know if any gods really do that, right? Like that seems all really dark. But because usually they gods are like for prosperity and gods for there are gods for all these other kind of things, and not necessarily gods of goodness and whatever, but they're not necessarily like evil. He's considered evil because he rebuilds the high places, which are areas for them to make new gods. And I'm not saying this like making God seem ridiculous. I'm saying this because I want you to understand how very evil it is if you say you love and you follow the God that created the universe, right? The God of the Israelites, the God Jesus, right? If you say that you follow this God, how evil it is to turn away and to turn to anything else, right? Like that's why I'm noting that. So he does that, right? And he erects altars to other gods. He brings up these Asherah poles. He worships the starry hosts. So he worships like the heavens, right? So again, he's not worshiping the Lord, but he's worshiping the creation that the Lord made. He sacrifices his own son in the fire. Now, this could mean a very literal sacrifice, or it could mean some kind of like he could have burned him up in some way, or it could mean like he set him in the fire in order to, the fire could be figurative, not literal, right? Like he did that to give him power and strength or whatever. So I want to be clear that it could be very literal, or it could be something a little bit different. He practiced divination. He sought omens, consulted mediums. So all of these things were things that were away from the Lord. So he asked other spiritual beings. So when we use this expression like, yeah, I don't follow God, but I'm really spiritual, right? I talk to the land, and this seems like a good thing. It sounds like it couldn't possibly be evil. But God who made you says that you're worshiping something else other than me. You're putting your faith in something else other than me. That something else isn't as good as me. It is not me, and I'm the one who created you. So you must take your faith away from those things and put your faith in me, because those things are going to steer you away from me. They're going to turn you away from me and towards something else. So I just want to know, like, some of them could be deemed really evil, but most of them could be practices that we do on like a daily basis. Like we do some of these things. Like I'm going to put this out there, and I'm not saying this is evil. So we might look at our horoscope every day, right? Like if you're looking at your horoscope every day and you're like, this is how I'm going to live my life today, that's probably something you want to rethink, right? You just want to sort of like, wow, I didn't necessarily know that might be going in a wrong direction, right? Because that's not the Lord. So you're not asking the Lord every day. You're praying to or worrying about what some, lineup of the stars is giving you instead of God. So like I said, it's literally just an example. All right. So those were the reasons that he was considered evil in his eyes. And it says, he says, you got to do it, because he says, this is what I did for you, right? So I took you out of Egypt. I did all these things. And he said, I made this covenant with you. And he said, I will not again, in verse 8, I will not again make the feet of Israelites wander from the land I gave their ancestors, if only, right? So this is an if only they will be careful to do everything I commanded them and will keep the whole law my servant Moses gave them. I hear over and over and over again, and I hear over and over and over again, because I listen to podcasts all the time. Like, the gift the Lord gave you was free. The gift the Lord gave you was free. And yes, he gave us a gift that we can't purchase on our own, right? And I would agree that like that's something we can't buy, but there is something that we need to do because of that gift that he gave us. So is it a free gift? It is, but we need to be who he wants us to be, because he says that you have the ability to do so. He gives us the ability to do so, and then he says to do it. And if we don't do it, something comes from that. And I can't see that God would make something come from that if we weren't able to do it through his power by following him, right? So we have to follow him. So it's sort of like an if then. All right, moving on into verse 10, it says, the Lord said through his servants, the prophets, Manasseh, king of Judah, has committed these detestable sins. He's done more evil than the Amorites who preceded him and has led Judah into sin with his idols. Therefore, this is what he says. I'm going to bring such disaster on you. I am going to bring destruction. It's going to look like it's going to be a plumb line measured against Samaria. And if you remember, Samaria is up in Israel, and Israel was taken, destroyed by the Assyrians. And if you guys remember this, some were taken and some were left. So a huge amount were taken, but a lot stayed. But there's like nothing left, right? Like it's no longer their land. He sent other people to live in this land and to take it over. And they are keeping the Israelites as like servants, right? As servants, as slaves. And when they went over into the other lands, they are serving and they're slaves over there as well. So they don't have freedoms in any of these places, right? They don't have freedoms to practice their faith. They don't have freedoms to own their own anythings, right? Like, so they don't have any of these freedoms. They are overtaken and overrun by other nations. And so he said that you guys, you think that's bad? It's going to be so bad for you. He says, I'm going to forsake the remnant of my inheritance and give them into the hand of their enemies. They're going to be looted and plundered, right? They're going to be all of these things. And it says, 16, moreover, Manasseh also shed so much innocent blood that he filled Jerusalem from end to end, besides the sin that he caused Judah to commit. So Manasseh himself committed sin, and that's not even counting for the stuff that he made Judah do. And then they did evil in the sight of the Lord because of Manasseh. Don't make me go into leadership again. Did it a million times. So what happens then, what follows it is in Second Chronicles 33, they're not listening, right? So he sends people to tell and they don't listen. And so then he sends the king of people from Assyria to go in and to take him and to bring him, Manasseh himself, to Babylon, right? And says it took him by hook and nose, right? So they kind of bound him, took him by a hook in his nose and brought him over. So he's in chains, he's bound, he's got no power. And then when he's there, he cries out to the Lord. So it takes all of that to get him to cry out to the Lord. And once he cries out to the Lord's like, okay, I'm going to give you a chance. He brings him back, right? Because he humbled himself. So that was what was important. And then he says, when he comes back, then he starts to follow the Lord. So it says, afterward, he rebuilt the outer wall of city of David, and he made it much higher. He stationed military there. So now he's starting to protect his land. He did a lot of good things. However, what he didn't do was tear down some of the stuff, some of the high places, because his people still worship there. Now, it does say that they worshiped the Lord, but they worshiped at the high places, which was not the temple, right? It was not anywhere in which the Lord dwelled, right? So they were still out of whack, although not completely out of whack. And then it says Manasseh dies and he rests with his ancestors, and then Amon, his son, takes over. Amon only takes over for 2 years. I think he's 22, right? Amon is 22 when he becomes king. He reigns 2 years, and he does evil in the sight of the Lord. Because he does evil in the sight of the Lord, people come up and they assassinate him. And then after they assassinate him, other people come up and kill the people who assassinated him. So it's like sort of like a mass destruction kind of thing in that area. And then it says they make Josiah, his son, king in his place. Josiah is another super crazy young king. So I think Josiah is 8. He's 8 years old when he becomes king, and he reigns in Jerusalem for 31 years. So again, he comes in as a very young child and he rules. He does right in the sight of the eyes of the Lord. So he is a good king. He follows the way of his father David. And he doesn't turn aside. Now, in the 8th year of his reign, when he was still young, so he's about 16, give or take, he begins to seek the God of his father David. So obviously it takes a few years. He's young, he's a kid, and then he starts to seek his father David. And then in his 12th year, when he's around 20, I think I did the math, he's around 20, he begins to purge Judah and Jerusalem of all the high places. So it's funny how all that stuff that quickly got built back up again. Everyone's worshiping there, and he starts to take everything down. He tear down Asherah poles, right? So this again is another great awakening, I guess, revival, maybe we can call it, for the land of Judah. So it says he purges everything, and in the towns of Manasseh, Ephraim, and Simeon, as far as Naphtali, and in the ruins around them, he tears down all the altars. So he even goes all the way up into the land of Israel, right? And he tears down all of that stuff and cleans all of that area and takes all of the different God stuff away from there. And then he goes back to Jerusalem. Now we're going to come into Jeremiah. So to just give you a little bit of taste of who Jeremiah is, he is also a prophet. He is a prophet for about 29 years. So he's another long-standing, like similar to Isaiah, he's another long-standing prophet. So he prophesies he prophesies during the reign of who is this? Josiah. Whew, took me a minute. So he prophesies during the reign of Josiah, and then it looks like he continues to prophesy after Josiah's death. So, because he's in the 13th year of Josiah. All right, so it says, Jeremiah is the son of Hilkiah, who was one of the priests in the tribes of Benjamin. So he's already sort of like, he's not a Levite, but he's in some ways of a priestly heritage, or maybe he is a Levite, but he's living in the tribe of Benjamin as a Levite, but it doesn't say that. It does say he's in the tribe of Benjamin. And so the word of the Lord comes to him. And so he's literally talking to him, much like he was literally talking to Isaiah. He is talking to him. So it's like the Lord comes to me and he says this, right? And so he is then going out and he is speaking the word to the people of Israel according to what he said to God, right? This is not I don't think this is the Urim and Thummim thing, right? Like, so those were those sort of like dice where you would say, should I go out and destroy this nation? The head priest would roll those dice and the answer would be yes or no, right? That you should follow this or you should not follow that. I don't think this is it. I think he's in direct conversation with the Lord, because it says the word of the Lord came to me saying, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as prophet to the nations. So he knew Jeremiah. And this leads me to more questions than answers, because like, what does it mean that he knew him before he formed him? Is his spirit in a way like up there where God knows his spirit and then he formed him into human flesh and sent him down? I don't know. We don't have an answer to that, but I feel as if it's something bigger than just he kind of put all those pieces together and sent it down. But that could be it as well, right? And so he's just letting Jeremiah know, I knew what you were going to do. I created you for this purpose. I made you for this, right? You are the right person for the job, and I've made you for this. And I'm saying that because I don't think it's going to be an easy road. I don't think prophesying was really ever an easy road for people. I think it could have gone as far as, the stories from Isaiah were where he, during his death, this is not, we don't know for sure, but we think that he was sawn in half. Right. So he was preaching to them death and destruction, but you're going to come back. So he was preaching hope as well. But in the end, they sawed him in half. So prophets in this land didn't have the best of chances of living a really good life, right? What we would consider a good life, right? Ease and comfort and, right, all this good stuff. Like, he has people against him telling him to shut up and go away. And that's the nicest of things. So he says, I made you. And then in verse 6, he says, but I don't know how to speak. I'm too young. It reminds me of Moses when Moses was like, but I stutter. I'm not good at speaking. And God used him anyway. So here we go again with like, God doesn't look at anything that's on the outside to make a determination of whether he will or won't use you. You are never too little for him to use. You are never too much for him to use, right? Like your pride gets in the way and that he's not going to use, but you're never like, oh, I'm so much better than God. And so, right. Like You're never in a place where you can't be used by him. We are all formed and worked in such a way to be used by God. Jeremiah is created for this, to go out and talk to his people. And so he says, I can't do it. And the Lord says, you must, right? You must go to everyone I send you to. And whatever I command you, don't be afraid. I'm with you and I will rescue you. That means he's going to need to be rescued, right? The fine print means if I'm going to rescue you and be with you, there's going to be a need to be rescued, right? So sort of like prepare your life for this. Then the Lord reached out his hand and touched my mouth and said to me, I have my words. I have put my words in your mouth. I appoint you over nations and kingdoms. And this is what you're going to do. You're going to uproot them and tear them down. You're going to destroy and overthrow them. And then you're going to build and plant, right? So that's great at the end. But what's happening now is it's going to be destroyed. And then it's going to be rebuilt. Nobody wants to be destroyed. I've mentioned, I'm pretty sure I mentioned it on one of these recordings, that like, I fear revival is not going to come into the United States until there is destruction. I'm not calling for destruction. I want to be so ridiculously clear on that. But I fear that like we are begging for this great revival, and we might have a little bit like, oh, and then it kind of, and then maybe, and then it goes down, and then maybe a little bit, right? Like, but what we want, like this big overhaul of all Christians, like following the Lord and loving on God and lifting and praising his names, I fear that will not happen, right? Until what's happening now can't happen anymore, right? Like we're trying to eke our way sort of up the ladder, but I'm afraid that's not really the way in which God works, right? He's like, the system is broken. It needs to go away and it needs to be rebuilt in the way that I am going to shape it and rebuild it. And so that's what Jeremiah is telling them. Like, hey, all of you people, especially like, hey, all you people in charge, you're not doing things right. And so we're going to kind of put other people in your place. We're going to rebuild and we're going to plant again. So then he says, what do you see, Jeremiah? And Jeremiah says what he sees. And then he says, you've seen correctly. And then he says, what else do you see? And he says, I see a pot boiling. And he said, yes, you see that. There's going to be disaster coming from the north. I think this little distinction is just, this is just me, right? Do you see me? Do you hear me? Do you understand what it is that I am showing you? Right? So I think that he's trying to sort of build Jeremiah up, right? Like he's like growing him a little bit in the Lord. Like, do you see this? And this is what this means. So yes, you've seen well, and this is what this means. So he's saying, it's tilting towards the north, and he says, from the north, disaster will be poured out on all who live in the land. I'm about to summon all the peoples of the northern kingdoms, right? And he says, so people are coming to destroy. It says, I'm going to pronounce my judgments on my people, Israel. Here we go again. Get yourself ready. Stand up and say to them whatever I command you. Do not be terrified by them, or I'm going to terrify you before them. So you've got to stand up. He's not really giving him a choice. Like, you've got to go in, you've got to say all these things, or bad things are going to come from me, because I need you to go and do this. This is the job that I have given you. And he says they're going to fight against you, but will not overcome you, because I'm with you and I'm going to rescue you. So this is what he's going to proclaim, right? So this next section is a little bit of what he's going to proclaim. The word of the Lord came to me, Jeremiah, and said, go and proclaim in the hearing of Jerusalem, this is what the Lord says. And the Lord reminds them of the beginning. I remember the devotion of your youth. I remember how much you loved me. Remember when you followed me? And when he's saying you, he's going all the way back in Genesis, right? So again, if you weren't with me, go back. I want you to listen up to that foundation, build that foundation. And he said, what fault did your ancestors find in me? Like, I remember you loved me, and then what happened? And it said they followed worthless idols, and then they became worthless because they followed worthless idols. So then he starts talking about ancient Israel. He's reminding them of the time of Exodus, which was about 1,000 years before then. So it was like in the 1520s, give or take. And then now it's like the 600s, give or take, right? And so he's like, I brought you into fertile land, right? And then I did all these things for you. So he's reminding him of everything he did with Moses. And he says, therefore, because you're turning away from me, I'm bringing these charges against you. Cross over to the coast of Cyprus and look. Send to Kedar and observe closely. See if there has been anything like this. Has any other nation changed gods? Great question, right? Like, you guys keep following this and following that and turning to other people. Like, do you see other nations doing that? And they're not even gods. And you keep turning away from me. So my personal question is, why don't other people turn from other gods, right? Like, and maybe they do, but in here he's kind of like, do they do? You guys keep turning away from me. Is it that the Lord asks so much of us that we're unwilling to give? I feel like that's the case. I feel like if we're not given everything that we want, then we say God isn't good, right? Like, if somebody that we love doesn't survive, we say God isn't good. If the job that we want we don't get, we say God isn't good, therefore God doesn't exist, or therefore I want to follow something else, right? I believe that's what I mean, and I don't know, I'd love to hear answers if anybody has any, but what is it that makes people turn from him? Right? What is it that makes people say, like, that's it, I don't believe in him anymore? Or I still believe in him, I want him to rescue me when I want him to rescue me, but I want to sort of have like my other gods that I depend on also, right? Like my cushions, so to speak, right? I want that God of prosperity, or that God of love, or that God of, right, what war when I'm in a time of war. So I don't know. I wonder what that makes, what it is about him that people are so reluctant to fully follow. All right. So it says, my people have committed two sins. They've forsaken me and they've dug their own cisterns. So they've turned away from me, and then they kind of started doing things on their own. And then he follows up, like sort of finishing up in chapter 2. He says, have you not brought this on yourself by forsaking the Lord? Like, this destruction's coming, and you've brought it on yourself. He says, why are you going to Egypt to drink water from the Nile? Your wickedness is going to punish you. Your backsliding is going to rebuke you. So it's really your own stuff that's getting you. It's not me who's destroying you. It's your own unwillingness. He says, long ago you broke off your yoke and tore off your bonds. Like, you tore yourself away from me. He said, if I had planted you like a choice vine of sound and reliable stock, how then did you turn against me into a corrupt wild vine? Like, how did this happen? Although you wash yourself with soap and use an abundance of cleansing powder, the stain of your guilt is still before me, declares the sovereign Lord. So this is what Isaiah, or Jeremiah, I'm going to probably do that a lot. This is what Jeremiah is coming in and shouting to the people. You guys are filthy. You're worthless. You've turned against the Lord. And I'm going to note one more time that Israel does not believe that they turned against the Lord, right? They still have a foot in. They still believe that they are following, right? Even if they've added some other gods to the list, they still think they're following God. So he's saying all kinds of things that is going to infuriate these people. Hard thing to do as a prophet. That's how today ends. And so tomorrow we are going to continue in Jeremiah. I think tomorrow is just a reading of Jeremiah. So we're back in prophecy. I feel like this one sort of is a little bit different than Isaiah. So hopefully it's maybe a little more, so far it's been a little more literal. So we've been able to figure some stuff. I've been able to figure some stuff out, but that's all. If you have found this to be a blessing, I want you to like, share, and subscribe. And then I want you to keep reading in your Bibles. I'll see you tomorrow.